Knowledge was once a crime punishable by death. During the so-called Dark Ages, entire libraries of thought were systematically hunted and destroyed by those in power. But a secret world of ideas refused to die, a hidden collection we call the Shadow Archives. This is the story of how forbidden knowledge from alchemy to astronomy was saved by a clandestine network of rebels and scholars. By the end, you will understand the secret playbook used to outsmart censors and save civilization's most dangerous ideas. How did a single copied manuscript change the course of history? And what ingenious tricks made it invisible to the authorities who sought to burn it? What does it truly take to keep an idea alive when the world wants it erased? A single candle flickers in a dark cell, its faint light illuminating the hands of a monk as he copies a forbidden text. This is the human face of the Shadow Archives. It was never one single hidden library, but a vast, distributed collection of knowledge forced into a clandestine existence. These were the books and ideas deemed too dangerous, too heretical for the public world. So, what kind of knowledge earned this deadly status? The contents were as diverse as they were revolutionary. They included radical works on natural philosophy that challenged the accepted wisdom of Aristotle, early medical practices that conflicted directly with church doctrine, and mystical spiritual traditions that operated far outside the bounds of orthodox theology. As the historian of science David C. Lindbergh observed, the transmission of learning in the Middle Ages was a complex process, involving both the open channels of the schools and the hidden streams of private exchange. The line between accepted scholarship and forbidden law was not drawn by truth, but by power. Political and religious authorities decided what ideas could safely exist. Consider the fate of medical texts from the Greco-Arabic world that offered new anatomical insights, directly challenging the established principles of Galen. Or the cosmological ideas whispered for centuries that dared to place the sun and not the earth at the center of the universe. These were not just academic disagreements. They were intellectual rebellions, and their very existence was a threat to the entire established order. It makes you wonder, in our own information-saturated age, who gets to decide what knowledge is dangerous? Understanding this foundational struggle over ideas prepares us to meet the courageous architects who ensured their survival against all odds. Deep within the stone walls of a remote monastery, a scribe's hand moves steadily by candlelight. He is illuminating a page of a sanctioned religious text, but his true work is hidden in the margins. There, nestled between the lines of scripture, he carefully inks a forbidden astronomical diagram. This was the quiet rebellion of the monastic scribe, an architect of survival working from within the very heart of the establishment. Monasteries were sanctioned centers of learning, yet they operated under a strict orthodoxy that dictated which ideas were safe to copy and which were not. But the intellectual curiosity of individual monks often stretched far beyond those official boundaries. They became masters of subtle deception, preserving dangerous knowledge through ingenious tactics. One common method was to copy a prohibited text under the guise of a more acceptable work, perhaps binding a treatise on pagan philosophy inside the covers of a saint's life. Another was to hide controversial passages within lengthy, orthodox commentaries, where a daring idea could linger for centuries, waiting for a reader with the right eyes to see it. The Roman statesman Cassiodorus, who himself founded a monastery, once declared that every word of the Lord written by the scribe is a wound inflicted on Satan. Some devout scribes interpreted this as a holy mandate to preserve all knowledge, believing that even pagan wisdom contained glimpses of divine truth that should not be lost. We see this in the survival of classical Latin texts by authors like Lucretius, whose materialist poem, On the Nature of Things, presented a world view entirely at odds with church teaching. Yet monk after monk meticulously copied it, storing it safely alongside psalters and missals. The scriptorium thus held a dual identity, a public face of unwavering orthodoxy that secretly served as a private haven for the shadow archives. Their quiet, painstaking dedication ensured the flame of learning, however guttering, was never fully extinguished. This silent, individual perseverance would soon provide the foundation for something far more organized and widespread. These roads were the hidden arteries of a forbidden intellectual world. While the monastic scribe worked in stationary silence, another kind of rebel was always on the move. Picture a lone scholar, his cloak dusty from the road, his leather satchel heavy with rolled parchments. He finds shelter for the night at a castle, and after a shared meal, he and a sympathetic nobleman exchange more than pleasantries. By candlelight, away from prying eyes, they unrolled texts containing ideas that could get a man imprisoned. This was the nervous system of the shadow archives, a web of traveling scholars and itinerant teachers who carried knowledge across kingdoms and languages. Unbound by the walls of a university or the rules of a monastery, these intellectuals were ghosts in the machine of medieval control, almost impossible for any central authority to track or censor. Among the most colorful were the Goliards, wandering clerics and students who lived on the fringes of society. They composed and shared satirical poetry that openly mocked the hypocrisy of bishops and the greed of nobles, their verses spreading through taverns and town squares like a virus of dissent. The historian Charles Homer Haskins captured their essence perfectly, noting that the wandering scholar was a familiar figure who carried with him the new learning. But this was dangerous work. Survival depended on a fragile ecosystem of trust. They used coded language to identify allies, and they relied on the protection of powerful patrons. A feudal lord might shelter a scholar not for rebellious ideals, but for the practical knowledge they offered, perhaps a new method of metalworking from an Arabic alchemy text or a cunning architectural principle from a recovered Roman manual. This patronage, whether born of curiosity or ambition, created safe havens where forbidden ideas could be studied and debated. These mobile, decentralized networks transformed the shadow archives from a collection of hidden books into a living, breathing conversation spanning a continent. They ensured that an idea suppressed in Paris could quietly resurface in Cordoba or Prague. This constant, clandestine movement of people and parchment naturally raised a pressing question. Where could these dangerous ideas finally find a permanent home, a place to be studied freely without constant fear? A castle's great library offered more than just quiet. It offered immunity. Behind fortified walls and guarded by private wealth, the most controversial ideas in Europe found a permanent home. These were the sanctuaries of thought, the private libraries of nobles and independent city-states that became the ultimate repositories for the shadow archives. While a traveling scholar risked capture and a monk worked in secret, a patron with a castle could simply buy protection for dangerous books. Their motivations were a complex mix of genuine curiosity, a desire for practical advantage, and the sheer prestige that came with possessing rare knowledge. The court of Emperor Frederick II in Sicily stands as a legendary example. In the 13th century, while other rulers were enforcing religious orthodoxy, Frederick actively recruited Jewish, Muslim, and Christian scholars to his palace. There, they worked together to translate advanced Arabic texts on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine into Latin. These were the very books banned or ignored elsewhere, and their translation introduced revolutionary concepts to a Europe that was starved for them. A chronicler of the era wisely observed that a great lord's worth could be measured by the wisdom he gathered unto himself. This was not merely a hobby. It was a strategic investment in power. A newly translated Arabic medical text could save a lord's life. A recovered Greek manual on siege engines could win a war. A fresh astronomical chart could improve navigation and trade. These private collections created safe environments where scholars could debate, experiment, and refine illicit knowledge without looking over their shoulders. The security provided by this powerful patronage was the bedrock of preservation. It allowed the most dangerous manuscripts not just to survive, but to be studied and improved. This safety, however, only solved one half of the problem. A book might be safe on a shelf, but how could it be moved or copied without being seized by the authorities who hunted it? The scholar's hand trembles not from fear, but from intense focus as he completes the final symbol. His astronomical treat no longer discusses the orbits of planets. To any casual inspector, it is now a dry, pious commentary on the celestial hierarchies of angels. He has just performed a kind of alchemy on language itself, transforming dangerous facts into a coded script only another initiate could decipher. Encryption was the first and most vital line of defense for the shadow archives, a way to protect the message even if the physical manuscript was discovered. Scribes and authors became masters of disguise, developing complex ciphers, unique shorthand, and even inks that faded from view after writing. The most famous examples come from the world of alchemy, where texts are filled with elaborate, bewildering symbolism. A rose might represent a stage of spiritual purification. A lion devouring the sun could symbolize a specific chemical reaction involving gold. These were not just pretty pictures. They were a sophisticated language of concealment, designed to baffle the unworthy and protect profound secrets from those who might misuse them. As the legendary alchemist Basil Valentine supposedly warned, "Seek not the mysteries unless thou art called." This practice created a powerful barrier of understanding. The knowledge was not locked in a chest, but locked inside a puzzle. The very act of reading and interpreting such a text became a test of dedication and intellect, a rite of passage that filtered out the casual observer from the serious seeker. A manuscript could sit openly on a shelf for decades, its true revolutionary contents hiding safely behind a veil of allegory and code, completely invisible to the censors who hunted it. Yet not every text could be so thoroughly transformed. For the most dangerous ideas, another, even bolder method was required, one that involved hiding the forbidden in the most obvious place of all. A single sheet of parchment could hold two separate realities. The most brilliant works of antiquity often survived not as treasured volumes, but as faint ghosts beneath the surface of a prayer book. These are palimpsests, manuscripts where the original text was scraped away with pumice stone and written over, a common practice in an age when writing material was scarce and costly. The underlying text, often a classical Greek mathematical treatise or a pagan philosophical dialogue, was considered disposable, its vellum far more valuable than its ideas. Yet the erasure was rarely perfect. The original ink soaked deep into the animal skin, leaving a permanent, if nearly invisible, impression. Centuries later, this act of recycling became an accidental act of preservation. The very manuscript a censor would approve, a beautifully copied book of Psalms, secretly housed the dangerous knowledge it was meant to replace. It is a perfect metaphor for the entire shadow archives, the forbidden surviving directly beneath the acceptable, hidden in plain sight. Equally powerful was the use of marginalia, the notes and drawings scribbled in the blank spaces of a book's margins. Here, in the unofficial territory of the page, a reader's private thoughts could wander free from orthodoxy. A monk copying an approved astronomical text might carefully draw an alternative model of the solar system in the wide outer margin, a tiny, personal rebellion captured in ink. Another might write a skeptical question next to a theological claim, his comment creating a silent, centuries-old dialogue with the author. These notes were personal, immediate, and largely uncensored, giving us a direct window into the minds of those who handled these books. They prove that the struggle over ideas was not just between institutions, but within the individual conscience of a single reader. Today, multispectral imaging cameras peer into these manuscripts, revealing the lost layers with stunning clarity. Scholars are not just reading these books, they are excavating them, literally uncovering the ghost texts that censorship failed to destroy. This method demonstrates a profound truth, that the approved media itself could be turned into a shield. The parchment, the binding, the very form of the acceptable book became the perfect hiding place for the unacceptable idea. Yet for the most volatile knowledge, even this was not secure enough. Some truths were considered far too dangerous to ever be committed to parchment at all. A whispered ballad could carry more danger than a 1,000-page book. In the village square, a traveling storyteller gathers a crowd, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of an ancient tale. To the authorities, he is mere entertainment. But to the listeners, his story is a vessel, subtly woven with veiled critiques of the greedy lord or unorthodox ideas about faith that bypass the local priest entirely. This was the oral tradition, the most democratic and fluid channel of the shadow archives. In a world where few could read, knowledge lived in the air, carried on the breath of singers, poets, and dissident preachers. Radical theological concepts from groups like the Waldensians, who challenged the very structure of the church, did not spread through fragile parchment. They traveled on foot, delivered in open fields or hidden clearings by charismatic preachers whose sermons were memorized and repeated by their followers. You cannot burn a song, you cannot confiscate a memory. This made the spoken word incredibly resilient. The old Latin proverb, verba volunt, scripta manent, means spoken words fly away, written words remain. But for the censors, this was the problem. The flying words were impossible to pin down and destroy. A ballad mocking a corrupt official could be sung in a dozen villages by the next full moon, each singer adding their own local twist, adapting the message to fit new circumstances. This living archive preserved more than just subversive stories. It safeguarded vast bodies of practical, unsanctioned knowledge. Folk medicine, using local herbs in ways never recorded in official medical texts, was passed from mother to daughter. Innovative agricultural techniques that increased yields were shared between farmers in the fields, completely outside the sanctioned academic corpus. The shadow archives were not just locked in chests or hidden in margins. They lived in the minds and on the tongues of the people, a grassroots network of memory that ensured certain truths could never be fully erased. This deep, popular current of preservation would inevitably attract the attention of larger, more organized forces seeking to weaponize forbidden knowledge for their own ends. A university lecture hall in 13th century Paris crackles with more than just intellectual energy. Here, masters and students engage in furious debates over Aristotle's physics, their conclusions sometimes veering dangerously close to heresy. These early universities were not the serene ivory towers we might imagine. They were volatile centers of resistance, semi-autonomous zones where the boundaries of knowledge were tested daily. While they operated under the watchful eye of the church, their very structure fostered a new and potent idea, the concept of academic freedom. Scholars fought for the right to dispute and question, a privilege formerly protected in places like the University of Bologna's founding charter. This created a fragile but crucial space where the forbidden texts of the shadow archives could be pulled from the shadows and subjected to rigorous, open debate. The friction was constant. Ecclesiastical authorities would regularly condemn specific theses, forcing scholars to publicly recant or face excommunication. Yet, the very act of condemnation often spread the dangerous idea further, as students flocked to hear the very lectures that had been banned. Simultaneously, a different kind of haven was emerging hundreds of miles away. In the independent city-states of northern Italy and the Rhineland, a new power was rising, one built on commerce, not divine right. Wealthy merchant families in Venice, Florence, and the Hanseatic League cities valued practical knowledge, from double-entry bookkeeping to the advanced mathematics needed for navigation. Their civic pride and economic independence created a culture less beholden to feudal lords or distant bishops. In these bustling urban centers, a scholar could find patronage and a degree of impunity simply because his work offered a tangible advantage in trade or governance. The university and the independent city became the two great institutional pillars that gave the shadow archives a fighting chance. They were the battlegrounds where the war over ideas shifted from clandestine hiding to open negotiation. But when the negotiations failed and the pressure became too intense, these very centers became the launch pads for the most daring phase of the archive's journey, a final, desperate push to carry knowledge beyond the reach of censorship entirely. A quiet revolution was unfolding in a translation house in 12th century Toledo. Here, under the rule of a Christian king in a city recently reclaimed from Muslim rulers, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars sat together, their voices a low murmur of Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. Their task was monumental: to transfer the entire known world of advanced knowledge from Arabic into Latin. This was the great bridge to the East and the single most important infusion of knowledge into Europe since the fall of Rome. While much of Western Europe had indeed languished in intellectual isolation, the Islamic world had spent centuries in a golden age of discovery. Great centers of learning in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba had not only preserved the classical works of Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen, they had expanded upon them with brilliant original contributions from thinkers like the physician Avicenna and the philosopher Averroes. Their commentaries and encyclopedias contained ideas about medicine, astronomy, and the natural world that were centuries ahead of anything in the West. The translation movement, centered in Toledo and Sicily, was like opening a floodgate, a torrent of preserved knowledge which had been safely curated in the great libraries of the Islamic world, now poured back into a Europe starved for it. But this was not a simple delivery of neutral facts. These texts carried worldviews that directly challenged the foundations of Christian Europe. The recovery of Aristotle's works on natural philosophy, logic, and metaphysics, filtered through the lens of Islamic commentators, forced a profound intellectual crisis in the very universities that were supposed to defend orthodoxy. How could the Church reconcile faith with a pagan philosopher's logical system that seemed to explain the entire universe without any mention of God? This Eastern bridge proved the shadow archives were a global phenomenon. The knowledge Europe had tried to suppress was not lost, it was merely being kept safe by other cultures that valued learning differently. This massive recovery effort did not just end the so-called Dark Ages, it created the very tensions and tools that would ignite the Renaissance. The alchemist's laboratory was a world of its own, a place where the scent of sulfur clung to the air and the glow of a furnace illuminated intricate glass vessels. Here, the quest to turn lead into gold was never just about metal. It was a grand allegory, a physical process mirroring a spiritual transformation, where the purification of matter reflected the purification of the soul. Alchemy existed in a dangerous twilight, straddling the line between sanctioned learning and forbidden magic, making it a perfect resident of the shadow archives. Its practitioners were masters of obscurity, weaving their true knowledge into a tapestry of symbols. A dragon swallowing its own tail represented the cycle of transformation. The union of a king and queen symbolized the fusion of opposing principles. To the uninitiated, these were mystical drawings. To the adept, they were precise instructions, a coded language designed to protect profound secrets from both the merely curious and the watchful eyes of the authorities. This culture of secrecy was not paranoia, it was survival. Radical thinkers like Roger Bacon, a 13th-century Franciscan friar, championed the revolutionary idea of experimental science, arguing that we must learn from nature directly, not just from ancient books. Yet to avoid charges of heresy, he often had to cloak his methods in the acceptable language of alchemy and theology. His bold calls for empirical investigation were hidden within complex works that, on the surface, seemed to discuss spiritual mysteries. The famous alchemical maxim, attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, perfectly captures this holistic mindset. As above, so below. This simple phrase suggested a universe where the laws governing the stars also govern the processes in a crucible, connecting the vast cosmos to the minute chemical reaction. It was a worldview that saw unity everywhere, a direct challenge to dogmatic systems that sought to compartmentalize knowledge and spirit. In this dim light, the alchemists were preserving something far greater than recipes for elixirs. They safeguarded the very spirit of hands-on inquiry. Their countless experiments, meticulously recorded in cryptic journals, slowly built a foundation of practical chemistry. They discovered new elements, perfected distillation techniques, and developed laboratory equipment that would become standard for centuries. Their secretive work ensured that a methodology valuing direct experience over blind authority would not be extinguished. The personal risk was immense. An alchemist could be accused of witchcraft, demonic pact, or financial fraud at a moment's notice. Yet they continued, their furnaces burning in hidden rooms, protecting a flame of investigation that would one day ignite the scientific revolution. The crucible of alchemy thus held a dual transformation, changing both base materials and the future of human thought. A knock on the door in the dead of night was a sound that could freeze the blood of any scholar. The Inquisition's gaze was a chilling reality, a formalized system of suspicion designed to hunt down any deviation from accepted thought. An anonymous whisper from a jealous rival or a frightened neighbor could be enough to bring an inquisitor to your door, demanding to inspect your library. The human cost of preserving the shadow archives was staggering. For individuals caught possessing, copying, or teaching forbidden texts, the consequences were severe and merciless. Excommunication cut you off from your community and your salvation. Imprisonment meant a slow death in a damp cell. For the most defiant, the sentence was execution, often by burning, a horrifying public spectacle meant to terrify others into compliance. The trials of groups like the Amalricians in Paris demonstrated how intellectual curiosity was systematically conflated with treason and outright heresy. An inquisitor's manual from the era offered cold, pragmatic advice, stating that one must not only extirpate the heresy but also remove the roots. This philosophy justified a campaign of intellectual eradication that targeted not just books, but the minds that cherished them. The atmosphere this created was one of pervasive fear and suspicion, forcing the guardians of forbidden knowledge to operate with even greater secrecy. Trust became a rare and precious commodity, and the methods of concealment had to become more sophisticated than ever. Yet this intense persecution produced an unexpected result. Instead of eradicating dissent, it forged a community of dissidents with hardened resolve. The constant threat acted as a brutal filter, separating the casually curious from the truly committed. It forced these guardians to innovate, to develop ever more clever and resilient ways to share their ideas without detection. The very pressure meant to crush them only refined their techniques, weaving the hidden threads of the shadow archives into an even tighter and more impenetrable web. A hidden workshop hums with the quiet clatter of metal type. A printer carefully arranges letters for a text that, just decades before, would have been a death warrant to copy. This was the moment technology built an unbreakable shield around the shadow archives. The key was not just the press, but the paper it fed on. For centuries, books were written on parchment, a costly material made from the skins of dozens of animals. A single large Bible could require the skins of more than 200 sheep. This scarcity naturally limited the flow of ideas, keeping books rare, expensive, and easy for authorities to monitor. Then came paper, a technology that traveled from China through the Islamic world into Europe. Made from pulped rags and hemp, it was dramatically cheaper and faster to produce. Suddenly, it was economically feasible to make many copies of a text in secret. A controversial idea no longer had to be confined to one precious, easily seized manuscript. It could be duplicated and dispersed, but the printing press, invented around 1440, was the true revolution. It shattered the old system completely. Before Gutenberg, book production was the exclusive domain of monastic scriptoria and licensed university stationers. They were the gatekeepers. The press broke their monopoly overnight. As the historian Elizabeth Eisenstein demonstrated, this was not just an improvement, it was a full-scale communications revolution. A single printer could now produce hundreds of identical copies of a book in the time it took a scribe to complete one. This changed the fundamental math of censorship. A censor could hunt down and burn 99 copies of a forbidden text, but if 100 existed, the book survived. The knowledge was now immortal. The authorities' strategy had to change from destroying a few precious originals to desperately trying to police a tidal wave of printed material. They issued lists of banned books and raided printing shops, but the genie was out of the bottle. The technological shield of paper and press democratized dangerous knowledge, carrying the shadow archives out of hidden libraries and into the hands of merchants, artisans, and anyone who could read. This resilience paved the way for the open intellectual battles of the Renaissance and the religious upheaval of the Reformation. The very tools used to spread approved doctrine were now amplifying the voices of dissent. A new kind of rebellion was brewing, not in the ink of a scribe but on the tongue of a commoner. Listen to the sound of a controversial text being read aloud not in the scholarly Latin of the priests, but in the rough, vibrant cadence of everyday Italian, French, or German. This was the linguistic cipher, a masterstroke that used the language of the people to outflank the guardians of orthodoxy. Latin was the official key to knowledge, the language of the church, the university, and state power. By deliberately translating forbidden ideas into vernacular tongues, the architects of the shadow archives performed a brilliant act of subversion. They made dangerous knowledge accessible to a vast new audience of merchants, skilled artisans, and the lesser nobility, groups largely ignored by the Latin-speaking elite who acted as the gatekeepers of thought. The most famous example is the work of John Wycliffe's followers, the Lollards, who painstakingly translated the Bible into English. Their goal was radical: to bypass the priestly monopoly on interpreting Scripture and empower every individual to read the Word of God for themselves. To the authorities, this was not piety, it was heresy of the highest order. Writing in the vernacular was like hiding a treasure in a busy marketplace. A censor hunting for a dangerous theological argument in a Latin manuscript would never think to look at a popular poem or a practical manual on farming written in the local dialect. Yet that is precisely where these ideas found a new and safer home. This linguistic shift did more than just hide knowledge, it fundamentally changed its character. It was a crucial step in the secularization of learning, pulling knowledge from the exclusive, cloistered domain of the church and placing it directly into the bustling public sphere. By speaking directly to the people in their own words, the guardians of the archive ensured its most potent ideas could take root in the very soil of the culture itself. They were planting seeds in a much wider field, creating a fertile ground of popular awareness and dissent that would one day erupt in upheavals like the Reformation. This grassroots network, built on common language, proved that an idea spoken in the tongue of the many could be far more resilient than one written in the language of the few. The flames that consumed the Cathar fortress of Montségur in 1244 did more than just end a siege. They consumed an entire world of thought. As the Crusader forces tightened their grip, the last guardians of the Cathar faith knew their time was over. Their vast collection of manuscripts, their sacred texts outlining a complex dualist belief system that saw the material world as a prison, were gathered and cast into a great fire. This was not an accidental loss. It was a deliberate, systematic erasure of a competing intellectual tradition. The Cathars of Languedoc had built a sophisticated counterchurch with its own clergy, its own rituals, and most dangerously, its own literature. The Albigensian Crusade, sanctioned by the Pope, was not merely a war for territory. It was an ideological purge, a campaign designed to physically annihilate a way of thinking by destroying every person and every parchment associated with it. And for the Cathars, it was devastatingly effective. Almost everything they wrote is gone. The intricate details of their theology, their own voices explaining their beliefs, were turned to ash. What little we know of them today comes almost entirely from the meticulous records kept by their inquisitors. These documents are chilling to read. They are the victor's account, a portrait of a heresy drawn by the very men tasked with its extermination. We see the Cathars only through a lens of condemnation and fear, their ideas filtered through the language of their persecutors. How many nuances have been lost? How many arguments have been misrepresented? The Cathar archive stands as a ghost in the historical record, a stark and silent monument to a shadow network that failed. Its near-total destruction forces a haunting question upon us. For every hidden library that survived, how many others shared the fate of Montségur, vanishing so completely that we do not even know their names? This tragedy underscores the immense, often forgotten, price of failure in the clandestine war to save knowledge from the fire. The Voynich manuscript sits in a Yale University library vault, a silent challenge to centuries of scholarship. Its vellum pages, carbon dated to the early 15th century, are filled with a script that resembles no known language. Alongside the text are illustrations of plants that do not exist, intricate astrological charts unlike any known system, and detailed drawings of nude women bathing in a complex network of green, interconnected pipes. For generations, the world's best cryptographers, from wartime codebreakers to modern computer scientists, have tried and failed to crack its code. They have searched for patterns, analyzed the word structure, and applied every decipherment technique known to man. The text resists them all, its internal logic remaining perfectly, stubbornly opaque. This book is the ultimate artifact of the shadow archives, a physical embodiment of secrecy itself. Its very existence is a question. Is it an incredibly sophisticated cipher, hiding a revolutionary scientific treatise or a heretical religious text? Could it be a constructed language, recording a philosophical system so alien that we lack the context to even begin understanding it? Or is it, as some have argued, an elaborate and meaningless hoax, a medieval forgery designed to fool a wealthy patron? The truth is, we simply do not know. The manuscript's profound mystery forces us to confront the limits of historical recovery. We can hunt for lost libraries and decipher palimpsests, but the Voynich represents a different kind of loss, the complete severing of an idea from its context. It is a locked door for which the key has been thrown away. This single, unreadable book is a powerful symbol. It reminds us that for every successful act of preservation, for every text smuggled out of a monastery or hidden in a merchant's chest, there were other streams of thought that may have vanished without a trace. The Voynich manuscript is their ghostly representative, a tangible reminder that the map of medieval knowledge is still full of blank spaces, territories of the mind we can no longer visit. Its enduring enigma invites us to wonder what other profound secrets, what other complete worldviews were lost to the flames of censorship or simply faded away through the slow decay of time. The hum of scholarly debate in a medieval Jewish quarter was a sound that crossed continents. Within these vibrant centers of intellectual life, scholars fluent in Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin performed a quiet miracle, acting as indispensable cultural and linguistic bridges. While official channels in much of Europe suppressed certain streams of thought, Jewish communities became crucial custodians for the shadow archives, safeguarding the philosophical and scientific texts that others sought to erase. Their unique position, often living as a minority amid Christian or Muslim majorities, forced them to develop sophisticated methods for preservation and transmission. This was not a matter of simple storage, but of active, continuous engagement with the most dangerous ideas of the age. Thinkers like Moses Maimonides, a 12th century physician and philosopher, stand as towering examples. Working in Cordoba and Cairo, he produced his seminal work, The Guide for the Perplexed, a profound synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy, Islamic thought, and Jewish theology. He was not merely preserving Greek knowledge, he was refining it, wrestling with it, and creating a vibrant intellectual tradition that existed parallel to the Christian mainstream, often influencing it in subtle but profound ways. The survival of such texts within these communities ensured they remained alive, not as dusty relics, but as living conversations ready for rediscovery. Their role as translators was perhaps their most vital contribution to the archive's survival. In translation houses from Toledo to Sicily, Jewish scholars, often collaborating with Christians and Muslims, rendered the vast corpus of Greek and Arabic learning into Hebrew and later directly into Latin. A medical encyclopedia by the Persian polymath Avicenna, or a philosophical commentary by the Arab Averroes, would first be translated into Hebrew for study within the Jewish world. Later, that Hebrew version would serve as the source for a Latin translation that could then circulate in European universities. This multi-step process made Jewish scholars the essential linchpins in the greatest knowledge transfer of the Middle Ages. Their international connections, forged through widespread trade networks and the diaspora, made them ideal conduits for ideas. A text band in Paris could travel via a Jewish merchant's personal library to a scholar in Naples or Prague, completely bypassing the official channels of censorship. This highlights a profound truth about the shadow archives. Their survival was never a solitary achievement. It was a multicultural, interconnected effort, defended by a coalition of the marginalized and the enlightened who understood that knowledge itself was the most precious cargo. This decentralized international network demonstrated a resilience that any single library, no matter how well hidden, could never hope to match. Constantinople's walls guarded more than just an empire, they protected the very memory of the ancient world. While Western Europe was fracturing into isolated kingdoms, the Byzantine Empire stood as a colossal, unbroken sanctuary for classical thought. Its libraries were not secret caches, but glorious public institutions, their shelves bowed under the weight of original Greek and Roman texts that had long since turned to dust elsewhere. Here, generation after generation of Byzantine scholars performed a sacred duty, meticulously copying and preserving the complete works of Plato, Aristotle, and a host of other authors. This was not a clandestine operation, but a central pillar of the state's identity, a living link to a glorious past. The survival of this knowledge was so seamless, so integrated into the fabric of Byzantine life, that it became an almost invisible act of preservation on a civilization-wide scale. Then came the year 1453, when the city's legendary defenses finally crumbled before the Ottoman cannons. Yet, in a stunning turn of events, the sanctuary did not fall. The conqueror, Sultan Mehmed II, viewed the city's captured libraries not as spoils to be burned, but as treasures to be possessed. He actively patronized Greek scholars, collected their manuscripts, and allowed this river of knowledge to continue flowing, now under an Islamic banner. This was a geopolitical sanctuary, where the very definition of forbidden knowledge shifted with the border. A pagan Greek text deemed dangerously heretical in Paris was, in Constantinople, a valued piece of philosophical history worthy of study and respect. This Eastern stewardship ensured the survival of a vast repository of learning that would have been systematically purged in the West, from advanced Neoplatonic mysticism to groundbreaking geometrical proofs. The exodus of Greek scholars carrying precious manuscripts into Italy after the fall of Constantinople did not just bring new ideas, it delivered the original source code of Western civilization back to a continent that had forgotten it. The Italian Renaissance was not born in a vacuum. It was sparked by this massive infusion of texts that had been kept safe for 1,000 years in the East. The shadow archives, therefore, were never a solely European secret. Their survival was a global achievement, a testament to the fact that one empire's heresy could be another's greatest cultural treasure. A forbidden book is not just read, it is felt. The weight of a hidden manuscript in your hands carries more than words, it carries a dangerous thrill. For the medieval scholar guarding the shadow archives, this secrecy was a double-edged sword, a source of constant anxiety that also forged an unshakable sense of intellectual superiority. They lived with a profound and isolating fear, the knowledge that a single misspoken word or a misplaced trust could lead to ruin. Yet, this same pressure cultivated a fierce pride, the conviction that they alone were the guardians of a deeper truth, a light the world was not yet ready to see. This was not merely about hiding information, it was about cultivating a specific state of mind, one that saw official dogma as a veil to be pierced. Within esoteric traditions like Gnosticism, this mindset was the very core of belief. For them, gnosis, or secret knowledge, was not just information, it was the key to spiritual liberation, a direct and personal revelation that made the established church and its public teachings seem hollow by comparison. To possess such a truth was to be spiritually awake in a world that was asleep. This psychological empowerment created incredibly strong, almost tribal, bonds among initiates. The shared risk of preserving a dangerous text forged a community where trust was absolute, and membership was defined by a mutual commitment to a truth that could not be spoken aloud. The very act of encoding a message or hiding a book was a ritual that reinforced their identity as the enlightened few. This transformed the scholar from a passive librarian into an active revolutionary of the mind. Their struggle was not just to save parchment, but to protect a way of thinking that valued questioning over obedience and inquiry over acceptance. The inner strength they derived from this secret identity was the true fuel that sustained the entire clandestine network, proving that the most resilient shield for a dangerous idea is a mind that has already been set free by it. A gold coin changes hands in the dim light of a print shop, its clink a quiet signal of a transaction that could send both men to prison. This was the clandestine economy of forbidden ideas, an underground market where the survival of the shadow archives depended not just on courage, but on cold, hard cash. The production of a single banned book was a significant financial undertaking. Parchment and paper, ink, and the immense labor of a skilled scribe or a discreet printer all came with a heavy price tag. To fund this dangerous work, a sophisticated grey market emerged, connecting wealthy patrons with the artisans willing to risk everything. A merchant with unorthodox philosophical leanings might commission a translation of a radical Arabic text, while a noblewoman curious about new astronomical models could secretly subsidize an entire print run. Their motivations varied, from genuine intellectual passion to the desire for a unique status symbol, but their gold was the lifeblood that kept the presses rolling. This demand created a shadowy distribution network of underground booksellers. These dealers were masters of disguise, operating from back rooms and using coded language to connect with trusted clients. A volume of approved sermons might have its covers hollowed out to conceal a treatise on alchemy. A book listed in a catalogue as a farming manual could, upon delivery, reveal itself to be a political satire criticizing the crown. The very illegality of these texts drove their price sky high, transforming a book into a luxury item that proclaimed both the owner's wealth and their daring intellect. This vibrant economic ecosystem reveals a profound truth. The fight to save knowledge was not solely a battle of ideals fought in silent monasteries. It was also a practical, gritty enterprise of supply chains and financial risk. The steady flow of gold coins proved there was a powerful, sustained hunger for the ideas the authorities had banned. This demand created a powerful feedback loop. Financial support enabled the production of more copies, which in turn reached new readers and created more patrons, ensuring the archive's continuous renewal. The economic vitality of this hidden trade was the ultimate measure of the Shadow Archive's cultural power, a silent vote of confidence in a future where these dangerous ideas would one day see the light. A stone gargoyle stares down from a cathedral rainspout, its twisted features more than just a fanciful monster. To the initiated, its very form could be a silent protest, a subtle mockery of a corrupt bishop, carved in stone for all to see but only a few to understand. The grand cathedrals and illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages were far more than declarations of faith. They were the most public and durable of all the shadow archives. Skilled artisans, the stonemasons, glassworkers, and painters, possessed a rare independence. While they worked for the church, their guilds protected their own traditions and knowledge, allowing them to embed layers of meaning invisible to their clerical patrons. Within the breathtaking geometry of a rose window, one might find the precise proportions of the golden ratio, an esoteric mathematical principle revered by ancient philosophers. The intricate carvings on a capital could tell an entire alchemical allegory, with the lion representing raw matter and the pelican symbolizing a crucial stage of purification. Even a seemingly straightforward painting of a saint might include, in the background, a meticulously rendered plant that matched no known species in an approved herbal, a direct visual quote from a forbidden book of pagan medicine. This was preservation in plain sight, a brilliant strategy that used the most celebrated public art as a shield for illicit knowledge. The message was not locked away but displayed proudly, trusting that its true audience would recognize the symbols. For a population that was largely illiterate, these visual cues were a powerful channel of communication. A weaver looking up at a stained glass window might not read Latin, but he could understand the symbolism of a green lion, a common alchemical code. This transformed entire buildings into silent teachers, their lessons woven directly into the fabric of daily life. The legacy of the Shadow Archives is therefore not just in hidden manuscripts, but carved in stone and glowing in colored glass, a testament to the human drive to speak truth to power, even when that truth had to be written in a code of beauty. A theologian's hand trembles as he writes a commentary on Aristotle, his mind torn between two different paths to truth. This was the deepest current running beneath the Shadow Archives, a philosophical war between faith and reason that threatened to split the medieval mind in two. For centuries, knowledge was largely a matter of accepting divine revelation and the authority of the Church. But the recovery of Aristotle's works, with their powerful, self-contained systems of logic and natural philosophy, presented a profound challenge. Here was a pagan thinker who seemed to explain the entire universe through observation and reason alone, with no mention of scripture or God. This created an intellectual crisis that could not be ignored. Radical thinkers like Peter Abelard threw fuel on this fire. His daring motto, "I doubt therefore I think therefore I am," placed questioning at the very center of understanding. He argued that through doubting we come to inquiry, and through inquiry we perceive the truth. To the authorities, this was not a path to wisdom, but a direct threat to the foundations of a society built on unwavering belief. Abelard was repeatedly condemned, his books burned, yet his ideas persisted, whispered in university halls and copied into the margins of safer texts. The official response to this crisis was a system called scholasticism, a grand intellectual project to harmonize the logic of Aristotle with the doctrines of the Christian faith. Great minds like Thomas Aquinas built vast, intricate theological systems attempting to prove that faith and reason could not conflict, because both ultimately led to the same divine truth. But this synthesis was a fragile peace treaty, constantly on the verge of breaking down. The theory of double truth, for instance, was a dangerous idea suggesting that something could be true in philosophy but false in theology. This was a line the authorities would not allow to be crossed. Thinkers who pushed Aristotelian logic too far, like Siger of Brabant, found their propositions condemned, their careers ruined. This constant friction, this tense negotiation between what could be thought and what could be said, is what defined the intellectual landscape. It was this very tension that determined which ideas were forced into the shadows. A text wasn't hidden because it was false, but because its rational conclusions were too dangerous for the accepted balance of power. The clandestine networks that preserved these works were not just saving parchments, they were protecting the very right to ask questions. They were ensuring that the light of rational inquiry, however flickering, was never completely snuffed out. This long, clandestine struggle to defend reason against the demands of pure authority was the essential, unseen groundwork for everything that would follow, a quiet revolution of the mind that made the later scientific revolution possible. A medieval monk's hidden marginalia and a modern activist's encrypted hard drive are separated by centuries, yet they are united by the same urgent purpose. The struggle to protect forbidden knowledge did not end with the printing press. It simply evolved, finding a new battlefield in the digital landscape we inhabit today. Our modern shadow archives are not stored on parchment, but on servers scattered across the globe. They are the leaked document troves, the censored websites mirrored on 1,000 different computers, the massive libraries of pirated academic journals that bypass paywalls, and the databases of suppressed political information. These are the decentralized digital fortresses where dangerous ideas now find refuge. Just as a king's censor could order a book burned, a modern government can issue a takedown notice demanding a website be erased from the internet. They can throttle access to information or shut down the entire internet in a region, a digital book burning on an unimaginable scale. In response, a new generation of scribes has emerged, armed with powerful new tools. They use virtual private networks to cloak their digital footsteps, the Tor browser to navigate an anonymous, hidden web, and blockchain technology to create permanent, unchangeable records that no single authority can alter or destroy. These methods create a system that is incredibly resilient, where information can be copied and distributed infinitely, making it virtually impossible to fully eradicate. This digital parallel forces us to confront the same profound ethical questions that haunted the medieval mind. What knowledge is so vital that it must be saved at all costs? Who has the right to make that decision? The contemporary fights for net neutrality, which demands all data be treated equally, and for robust digital privacy, are not abstract political debates. They are the direct descendants of the medieval struggle for the right to read, to write, and to think freely. The parchment has been replaced by fiber optic cable, and the secret handshake by a cryptographic key, but the fundamental human drive remains unchanged. Understanding how fragile scraps of parchment survived the Dark Ages provides us with more than just a fascinating history. It offers a practical playbook for our own time. It teaches us that censorship can be outmaneuvered by decentralization, that secrecy can be a shield for truth, and that the determined few can safeguard the knowledge of the many. This long view of history grants us a powerful sense of hope, a reminder that the light of an idea once kindled is remarkably difficult to extinguish. Our journey through these hidden passages of history reveals a profound truth. The era we call the Dark Ages was not an intellectual void, but a landscape of fierce and clandestine struggle. A quiet dedication burned in monastic scriptoria, where scribes preserved pagan wisdom in the margins of sacred texts. Bold networks of traveling scholars carried dangerous ideas along dusty roads from one safe haven to the next. Alchemists encoded their discoveries in bewildering symbols, and noble patrons built fortified libraries that acted as intellectual sanctuaries. This was a diverse and uncoordinated coalition, a tapestry of individuals who worked tirelessly to ensure the flame of knowledge was never extinguished. Through sheer ingenuity and immense personal courage, often at the cost of freedom or life itself, they built a bridge across the centuries. The shadow archive they protected did not merely survive. It provided the essential foundation for everything that followed, for the dazzling rebirth of the Renaissance, for the rigorous questioning of the scientific revolution, and ultimately for the shape of our modern world. This survival stands as a powerful testament to the indomitable human spirit and its relentless, innate pursuit of truth. Censorship, no matter how absolute it seems, never fully succeeds. It only forces knowledge underground, where it adapts, grows resilient, and waits patiently for its moment to re-emerge into the light. This history challenges us to look at our own world. What vital knowledge are we working to preserve today, and what important ideas might be quietly slipping into the shadows around us? The fight for the future of thought is never truly over. If this exploration of intellectual resilience has captivated you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the hidden corners of history. We would love to hear which part of this secret history surprised you most, so please share your thoughts in the comments below.